General Counsel, and I also have my own small business, Cakes by Bouquet. Today we're going to be going through making a carrot cake that is decorated as a beautiful flower bouquet, just in time for Mother's Day. The first step is making our cake batter. So in front of me I have all the ingredients to make the cake batter, which you should have seen the ingredient list that we posted previously. If not, I'll ensure that it's in the comments right below. And then we also have 2 9-inch cake pans. You can also use 8-inch. It will create a slightly thicker cake. I have some extra shortening and extra flour. This will be used to ensure that your beautiful cake doesn't stick to the pan. And we have some parchment and a marker. We will also be using this to ensure that your cake does not stick to the pan. Believe me, if you skip these steps, you will be incredibly sorry when it comes time to take the cakes out of the pan. I personally have a couple gloves because I don't want to be stopping to wash my hands in the middle of this. You don't have to. It's for when we divide the eggs and put the shortening on. And then I have varying size spatulas and a whisk. Let's get started. The first step we are going to do is we're going to be creating an emulsification with the fat and the sugars. This will create a light, airy texture to your cake and give it a beautiful crumb. Today I'm using a stand mixer. You don't have to use one if you don't have it at home, but it is ideal to use some form of electric mixer on this. So if you have a beater, one of the handheld with the beaters on it, that will work as well. We really need to whip as much air into this cake as possible in that first step. On your stand mixer, if you're using that, I have a paddle attachment. So into the mixer, we are going to be pouring 1 cup of packed brown sugar, a half a cup of white granulated sugar, 4 tablespoons of softened butter. To create softened ingredients, you want to make sure that you're pulling out your butter, your eggs, and your milk at least 1 hour before starting to prepare the cake. That way all of the ingredients are at the same temperature to create the perfect emulsification for this cake. And we're adding 5 tablespoons of, today I'm using vegetable oil. You can also use canola oil, or you can use melted coconut oil. Alright, great. Now that all of those ingredients are in the mixer, we are going to lock it and then stir on about medium speed. Running for about 2 to 3 minutes now, and we're really looking for a nice, light, airy texture. You want to see that the butter has lightened, and you can easily spread it around the sides of the bowl. Give it a good scrape to make sure we didn't miss any butter. And then we are going to start adding in our eggs. It's important that, like as I mentioned earlier, your eggs are at room temperature as well. You now just have nice room temperature soft butter in here. If you were to add a cold egg in, everything would seize up really fast and it would break your beautiful mixture and end up having the cake with not as nice of a crumb, and it could possibly separate during baking. So we're going to be slowly adding our eggs in. One trick that I learned way back in culinary school is always having an extra bowl while you're cracking eggs. A lot of times we tend to just crack the egg directly in the cake batter, but you're really sorry the first time you let a cake slip and it goes into your entire cake batter and you have to start from scratch. So I always have an extra bowl on hand to crack the egg into first to make sure that I don't have any shells. Beautiful. Oh, and see, that's why. I got a little shell in there, so you can just pick that out. And with your mixer on low speed, you will add 1 egg at a time. Perfect, my eggs are fully incorporated. Next, we are going to be adding in the egg yolks. So for this, I'm going to add a glove into the mix. And you may have seen some different techniques for getting the egg yolks out. I like using my hands. I don't necessarily, some people will use a shell and pass it back and forth. I don't like doing that because you don't know what contaminants are on the outside of the shell. If you're getting farm fresh eggs, it is always a good idea to give them a good rinse before you're using them. We tend to go local as much as possible, but we understand it might come with a little extra surprise on the outside. So we're going to crack our egg and use our hand as a barrier underneath to then crack the egg on top of. As we do that, we're going to let the white of the egg go through, so we're left with just the yolk in our hands. You can also use a slotted spoon for this and gently guide the whites through the bottom of the spoon. Add that in, mix again, and repeat. Beautiful. So now we are starting to have a beautiful silky batter happen. You can see that pouring down. You might see a couple little chunks from the brown sugar. That's completely okay. They'll work out as we continue to mix. Again, take that scraper and give a nice little scrape to the sides to ensure we didn't miss anything. Perfect. Now with those leftover egg whites, I always save them. Don't throw away your egg whites, you can use them. Add them to your next breakfast scramble, or you could even attempt to make meringues after this. Meringue is this beautiful light pastry that gives a nice little crunch, almost like a cooked marshmallow. So we'll set those off to the side and I'll save them for later use. Our next step is we are going to be adding in our vanilla to add in some extra flavor. The next step is going to be diving into the cake method, where we take our dry ingredients and go back and forth with adding them with a wet ingredient. In this case, we have our flour, which I have mixed in 1 teaspoon salt, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, a half a teaspoon ginger, 1/4 teaspoon nutmeg, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, that's what's going to give it its leavening, and a half a teaspoon of baking soda. With that, I've whisked it all up so it's nice and light and ensuring there's no clumps. If you have flour that's been sitting around a while, I highly recommend putting it through a nice fine mesh strainer. This will take any lumps and clumps out of that flour. We'll be using this again when it comes time to make the frosting. So give it a good whisk, ensure that all of the dry ingredients are mixed well. Now we're going to add the dry ingredients about 1/3 at a time, and then in between adding in a dry, we're going to be adding some of the buttermilk. If you do not have buttermilk at home, it's okay. You don't have to run out to the store to try to find some. You can simply add, it's about 1 tablespoon per 1 cup. So this is only 1/3 of a cup. I did just over 1/3 in case I need any extra for the batter. I'm using a local flour, so sometimes it tends to be a little bit thicker than store-bought flours. And then I added just about a half a tablespoon of white vinegar into this. I set it aside 10 to 15 minutes, and I have beautiful chunky buttermilk here that I didn't even have to run out for. With your mixer on a low speed, I use one of my little cups to add this. You're adding in about 1/3 of the flour. Okay. And now we'll be adding in about half of your buttermilk. And back to the flour. You always begin and end with your dry ingredient to bring everything together. Okay. Finishing off with the flour. Right, you can up the speed just a little bit to make sure everything is combined. Pause in the middle, bring back that spatula, and wipe down the sides. This will make sure that you capture all of the butter from our previous mixing. Perfect. And you can see your batter should be not too loose, but loose enough where it falls off the spatula. If your batter looks any thicker than this, you can add a little bit more milk. Depending on what type of flour, what's going on in your environment at that time, it could change what your batter looks like. Baking is a science. You do have to make adjustments from time to time. Now we'll be adding in the final ingredients. These are the bulk ingredients. This is what's giving it the final flavor and texture. I am boring. I only like carrots in my carrot cake, but you are welcome to add anything that you would like in it. I recommend toasted pecans. You can do shaved coconut. You can even do raisins or get creative. Do something like raisins in it. It's really up to you of what you like in there. I would not add for your outside of the carrots. This is about 3 cups of carrots. It equaled around 6 medium carrots shredded. I used my food processor to shred them, so it was nice and quick. If you are going to add an additional add-ins with this, do not go more than a cup total. So if you're using pecans and coconut, use a half a cup of pecans and a half a cup of the coconut. That way you don't end up with too much in your cake batter and it won't bake properly then. So we're going to lift this up for a moment here and add in our carrots. At this point, it's really important to make sure that you're not over mixing your cake batter. If you over mix it right now, it's going to become tough and it won't give that nice silky smooth cake you're looking for. Okay, just lightly mix those in. You want to do it just until everything is combined. Perfect. All right, we are going to set that aside just for a moment and bring in our cake pans. Now it's important with the cake pans that we make sure that we are using some type of fat. I tend to use shortening. You can use butter, you can use spray, you can use a little bit of oil to put some grease on the pan. You need to create a barrier so that your cake doesn't stick to it. These are technically non-stick pans, but your cake will still stick to them. Because what you don't see are tiny, tiny little scrapes and scratches that happen over time in these pans that will create a little bit for that sugar to grab onto while it's cooking. Take our shortening, and I use a paper towel, and I just spread it around. Just spread it around so it's nice and even around the pan. You can also use softened butter, or you can even use just a little bit of oil and spread it. This is a crucial step that 100% do not skip. You will be very sorry if you do when it comes time to pull those cakes out of the pans. It could completely make the cake implode upon itself, having to struggle to get it out. Alright, now that we have greased pans, we are going to create our circles. So I have 2 pieces of parchment here, and we're going to be creating circles out of them. So I'm going to fold them in half the short way, I guess. Okay, in half again, and in half one more time to create a little triangle. Flip one of those cake pans over. Find what you think is close to the center. It does not have to be perfect. I still have to cut them many, many, many times. Going to take a marker and trace right inside. Got it. Once we've traced it, we will now be using a quick pair of scissors and cutting along that line we traced. And now we will see what happens. Let's see how close I got. Woo, not too shabby, pretty close. So now to test it, you just lay it inside your cake pan. And if you see any areas that are sticking up, you can pull it back out, fold it up again, and just give it a quick trim. As I said before, I still do many, many trims as I'm making these circles. Okay, before we put that in the bottom of the pan, we're adding a little bit of extra AP flour to the mix. Now to get this all around your cake pan, you're going to be spinning it and tapping the sides as you spin it. This is going to help the flour get on all of the sides of the pan. Okay, I do it over the second cake pan. That way, I get to use as much flour as possible. Perfect. Let's do a little pop. Flip it over. Now with the second one, if you have a trash nearby you, just simply do it right over the trash. You can also do it over a bowl or even your counter and just wipe it up after. For this, give it a little pop, and you are all set. We unfold our parchment paper. You want to put it so that you're going to have one side that wants to fold back up. Put it so that tent almost is going right down onto your cake and flatten it as best as you can. The batter will also help to flatten it as you pour it in. As you can see, mine aren't perfect, but they're close enough to make sure the bottom of the cake doesn't stick. Okay, now it's time to fill our cake pans. Let's get this up here. You want to make sure you scrape off as much of the batter as possible. We want every little bit of this beautiful batter in our cake. Perfect. Now, to get a good measure, I tend to use a 1 cup measuring cup. And that way, when I'm putting it in, I can spread it as evenly as possible between the 2 cake pans. Don't worry about scraping in between right now, we'll scrape at the end. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it can help get you closer. This is really important when you're starting to work with layered cakes. You want each layer during baking to be as close to even as possible. This causes less cake waste later on when we get to the trimming and shaping part. Okay, we're at a good time to scrape down the sides. And not quite enough to use the measuring cup left, so I'm going to scrape out what's left of this. Share the wealth between both pans. Again, you want to get every bit of cake batter that you can. Perfect. We're going to spread it out evenly. You want to make sure the middle isn't too bound up, or else that could cause it not to bake, and you'll have a big dome on top. We want the least amount of dome possible. Spread them both out. Great. Now the last step. Now we get to hit things. That's the best part. Anyone have any pent up emotions right now? Well, now you can tap it out with the cakes. We're going to slam them on the counter a few times to get any hidden air bubbles. If you have trapped air bubbles in the cake, it could cause it to split on top or little poofs to come out. And again, this will just result in more trimming and shaping later, which is more wasted cake. A few good taps. Shake. Alright, I think I got it out. Okay, now it's time to put them in the oven. You're going to put it in that preheated 350 degree oven. It's going to take about 30 to 40 minutes to bake. What you're looking for is for the cake to spring back a little bit when you touch it towards the end of baking. You also want to keep an eye on the edges to make sure they're not getting too dark. You want it to be nice and caramelized, both on top and on the edges, but there's a fine line between caramelized and then a little bit burnt and bitter. Okay, let's put these in the oven and now it's time to clean up. My cakes just came out of the oven. We took about 35 minutes to cook, and it will vary depending on your cake size pan. The thicker your cake, the longer it's going to take to cook. As you can see, It's a beautiful golden brown all the way around the edge. And when you touch it, it has a nice spring back to it. So you can see how that comes up really fast. It springs back into shape. Another way you can test cake doneness is by using a toothpick. You can stick a toothpick right into the cake, and if it comes out clean, it's done. You want to make sure you check 2 spots on the cake. You want to start in the center or the thickest part of the cake, depending on if your oven has a slope. Pull it out as long as it's clean, and then pick one more spot right across. And we have our perfectly done cakes. Now what we'll do is we'll let these cool for about 20 minutes, and then I actually put them in the freezer overnight. So I'll cover them tightly with some saran wrap or other covering, and I put them in the freezer for, if you don't want to take all night, I would do it for at least 2 hours, so it gives some firmness to the cake. This will make it a lot easier when it comes time to frost and carve your cake. My preference is I leave it wrapped overnight. It will also trap extra moisture. If you don't let it cool down all the way first, you still have it a little warm when you put it in the freezer. It'll trap extra moisture into your cake, giving a really, really soft, silky texture. Okay, we'll come back after to decorate these beauties. Our cakes have been sitting in the freezer for over 2 hours, so now they'll be nice and firm and easier to cut and remove from the pans. As you can see, I just simply use dish towels to cover my cakes. It'll still help trap that moisture to give it a really nice texture after. So remove your dish towel. And all you need is a butter knife to help loosen up the sides of the cake. So you're going to take your butter knife, stick it in the side, and just as you're spinning, lightly press and pull the knife around the edge of your cake. Once you've gone around the entire edge, you're going to take that knife and just wiggle it up a little bit. As you can see, since the cake is nice and firm, it comes out very easily. Once you feel as though it's loosened enough, flip it over and just pop it right onto a cutting board. Because we put the parchment paper right on the bottom, this is now what helped it release from the pan so easily. Remove your parchment paper. Always remember to move your parchment paper. You do not want the surprise of biting into a piece of parchment paper while you are eating your cake. Let's repeat. Pop it out, flip it, and there you have it. Again, don't forget to remove that paper off your cake. So we're going to set one cake aside. It's okay if you put it back in the pan. Just now you know it will be able to come out again very easily. What we're looking for now is to level our cake. You can see when you hold it up, you can see there's a little bit of a bump in the middle of the cake. It's really important when you're doing layer cakes to ensure the cake is nice and flat and even all the way across. For this, I use a bread knife. It's a nice wide serrated bread knife. You can use any type of longer serrated knife that you have in the house. I do not recommend using a chef knife without any serration, as it'll be much harder to guide it through the cake. Now my cake has been out of the freezer for just about 10 minutes, so it's still very firm, but it's softening up just a little bit at the top. You don't want to let it soften too much, but you also don't want to start cutting into it when it's still really frozen. What I do is I put my cake on its side, and I look for the flattest part of the cake, which is right about here on this, and I can see it's bowing over on the other side. I turn that. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to be cutting this way. Don't cut towards yourself. Always either cut away or to the side. I'm going to use this hand very flat on top of the cake. Notice how I have my fingers pointing to the sky. Slightly angle your serrated knife in and start slowly going through the side of the cake. Perfect. With that last slice, you're going all the way through, and then you can take off that top layer and save it for snacks along the way. I use one of my dirty cake pans just as the scrap pan to make less dishes for after. So now when you pull this up, you can look around and it looks nice and even all the way across. If it's not perfectly level, I'm not asking you to get out a leveler out of your toolbox and test it. It's okay if it's not perfectly level. You can press in certain areas if needed, and you can also balance it with frosting later. So you can put a little bit more frosting on one side versus the other if you need to balance it a little bit. So we will be setting this off to the side. I am going to be setting it on this little cake board for now. We'll need to add some frosting to that after to make it stick. And we'll cut the second layer. Again, find the flattest portion of your cake. Mine is right over here. This is the low side. My oven tilts just a little bit to the back. Flat hand, fingers up, and start cutting and twist. You'll see products that they sell, cake levelers, and different tools that they use to level cakes out. I don't particularly use those. I feel as though a knife works the best way possible. And they seem like a lot of times you have to do it when the cake is completely thawed, and I find that that creates a much more crumbly experience, and you end up having to take off more layers than you intended. Again, we're almost all the way through. You can see it's getting a little bit sticky on the top. And there we go. Again, take that top layer off for snacks as you go. You'll notice family members tend to walk by a lot while you're making cakes and just start picking things out of your scrap bin. Beautiful, this cake looks perfectly level, and we'll be setting that aside. So right now you want to clean up your area, get rid of all the crumbs. The next step we'll be doing is frosting. Now that we've cleaned up all the crumbs from cutting our cake and leveling it, we've set it off to the side, it's time to make our cream cheese icing. We're using the cream cheese icing as a filling for this cake. It's not necessarily a good decoration icing. It comes out very loose and it won't hold up to trying to do decorative flowers with. With our cream cheese icing, this is a half recipe that I normally use. We will have a little bit extra, so it's okay to save. You have those cake scraps that we saved from before. Cream cheese frosting also tastes good on almost anything, so I'm not worried about having a little bit extra at any time. We're going to be using our stand mixer again. If you have a handheld electric mixer, that is perfectly fine too. Just watch your air and how much you're beating it, because it could add a little bit more air than your stand mixer. Our first step is adding in our 1/4 cup of softened butter and our 8-ounce package of cream cheese that was also left out to soften. Same with our cake ingredients. It's really important to make sure that all of your frosting ingredients are at room temperature. If you do not, you will end up with a chunky frosting at the end that won't pipe well, and then as you're eating it, you'll get little chunks of butter in it. So again, room temperature. These have been out for about 1.5 to 2 hours is a good time to leave it out of the fridge, depending on how warm your house is. We're going to add these directly into the mixer here. That little bit extra. Like it. And we're putting it about medium speed. Okay, about halfway through mixing, you want to make sure you stop the mixer and brush down the sides as always. This ensures that every little bit is getting incorporated. All right, another couple minutes has gone by. Now we want to add our salt and our vanilla. This is bringing an extra flavor to it, and I really highly recommend always use salt when you're creating your frostings. A lot of people think, oh my God, why would you put salt in something sweet? Well, it really helps balance that sweetness and adds a little extra flavor that people usually are trying to guess what on earth you put in your frosting to make it so good. We're going to put that again just to incorporate, and then we'll be adding in our powdered sugar. Great. In front of me I have about 2 cups of powdered sugar. It's really up to your preference if you're going to go on the 1.5 cup side or go to the full 2 cups. I personally like my frostings a little bit more on the savory side, especially when I'm pairing it with something like carrot cake. So I only add about 1.5 cups to my mixture. If you like sweeter frostings, which a lot of people do, go ahead and add that full 2 cups. We'll stop and taste it before you add the entire powdered sugar. So grab your powdered sugar, nice full scoop. And with your mixer on low, you're going to be adding it in. I really make sure your mixer is on low, or else I guarantee you, you will have this massive cloud of powdered sugar all around your kitchen. Okay, you can bring your mixer up a little bit to more of a medium speed to start getting it incorporated. After it's incorporated, go ahead and add more powdered sugar. Wonderful. And bring it up again. Woo! Told you, it gets everywhere really quick. And this is going to be my last addition before I taste it. I'm going to bring it up to more of a medium-high speed to get it really whipped and fully incorporated. Wonderful. Now's the best part. We get to taste it. So I took some of those delicious cake scraps we saved from earlier. You want to take a little bit of your frosting and spread it right over it. This is the best way to taste the sweetness of your frosting. A lot of times if you just dive in and taste it straight, you might not estimate how, you might over or underestimate how sweet it is and how well it will pair with your cake. So, cheers. That is absolutely perfect amount of sweetness to pair with this carrot cake. We're going to remove that, get as much of the frosting off of the paddle attachment that we can. Perfect, set that aside. Scrape it down again, make sure you've got everything. And we are going to be using a piping bag with a wide piping tip. This will just, you don't have to do this. It just makes it easier when you're piping in, when you're adding in the filling. You can simply use your spatula and just spread it around. I prefer just to use piping bags so it's a little bit cleaner and you don't have to worry about crumbs getting all over. So you fold your sides of your piping bag down, make sure it's a nice opening. You can get these even at Stop and Shop now, they sell piping bags. They do have a small cake section, or you can order it online through different stores. I tend to use Michael's or AC Moore. Both of them have a great section of baking supplies for that home baker. Going to scoop our frosting in. As I mentioned before, cream cheese frosting tends to be a little ooey gooey, so don't be surprised if you end up getting some all over while you're trying to scoop it in your bag. If you have trouble holding the bag with one hand and keeping it level with the other while scooping with the other, you can place this on top of, I'd say, put it in like a little mason jar or a wide cup, and you can balance it in that cup to also help while you're scooping in the frosting. Perfect, we're almost there. lightly squeeze. You don't want to make the frosting come out quite yet, so give it a twist, and you can see it's right at the edge, it's ready, but I'll give it a twist, and then I'm going to set it off to the side. Reminder that the cream cheese frosting is very ooey gooey, so if you lay it flat, it will start to drizzle out. So you can just simply lay it on a side plate here, that way you don't make a mess all over your counter. I'm going to clean up this bowl real quick, and then we can make our second frosting. Okay, we're ready to make our buttercream. We're using buttercream to decorate this cake, so it's a firmer frosting, and we'll have the ability to make our beautiful flowers to make it a Mother's Day bouquet. Classic cream cheese frosting really is only good for icing, and you can't do much detailed work with it, because it gets a little bit too soft for that. We're starting with our 2 cups of butter that we're going to be putting into our mixer, stand mixer again. Yes, you can use your handheld mixer if you need to still. And we're going to be whipping them until it gets nice and light and airy. There we go. You're going to go about medium, and then once it gets a little bit incorporated, you can go up to high speed just for a couple minutes. Stop about halfway through and scrape down your sides. Okay, you can see now the butter has lightened a little bit, and it's creamier in texture. It'll continue to lighten as you add in sugar and the other ingredients. So now it's time to add in your 2 teaspoons of vanilla, and again, 2 teaspoons of salt. Oopsies. Well, we'll add some in with powdered sugar. It sounds like a lot, but it's really not. Again, it adds a special little flavor to your buttercream that you will enjoy. Whip to incorporate. Sugar. Now with buttercream, it's really important to make sure you're sifting your powdered sugar beforehand. So using a fine mesh strainer, you're going to put about half a cup to a cup at a time, and you just simply tap the side of the strainer lightly, and this makes sure that you're getting out any little hard pieces that you don't want in your final frosting. If you end up with little hard clumps in your frosting, it makes it really difficult to make beautiful soft flowers at the end, and it can get clogged up in those little tiny piping tips. For this, it's about anywhere between, you can even go as low as 6.5 all the way up to 8 cups of frosting. I go about in the middle. I do just about 7 cups for this recipe. Again, this is really on your personal preference of how sweet you like to have your buttercream. Starting on low, slowly add your powdered sugar into your buttercream. You want to add about a cup at a time. The softer your frosting gets, the easier it is for the sugar to start incorporating. For a second so it's all combined, and then we're adding a little bit of heavy cream. So we're going to do around end up needing a little bit more or a little bit less depending on how much powdered sugar you put in. This heavy cream needs to be at room temperature, same as your butter. That's how you create a nice, smooth, soft, and silky buttercream frosting. We're going to turn this up to medium-high and just let it whip for a couple minutes. Halfway through, again, stop your mixer and scrape it down. I'm going to add 1 more tablespoon of cream to this one. It seems a little bit stiffer than I would like. That can be due to your temperature in your house. Give it a little scrape and see where we are. Oh, lightened a lot, and you can see the consistency is really starting to come out. Okay, I think this scrape will do it. After 1 more little session, we will have our beautiful buttercream frosting. Let's do another taste test. It's the best part. A little bit of your frosting right on the cake. Same concept as when you're making salad dressings. You're always supposed to taste your salad dressing you're making on a piece of lettuce to ensure that it's balanced. Right where I like it. A little salty, a little sweet, perfect. Now you can see this consistency is pretty thick. I left it very thick because you want to be able to easily shape your flowers. And if you go too thin, it'll end up just creating kind of messy business on the top of your cake. The heat from your hands is already going to start melting this a little bit. So it's very important that you have a nice stiff frosting to start out with. Now it's time for the best part. We get to decorate our cake, finally, yay, woohoo! So our first step is we need to make sure we affix the cake to the board that it's going on. So we want to remove those nice layered cakes from before. We have our little cardboard board. You don't need to do this. If you don't have a board, that's okay. You can just put this straight on a plate, or you can put it on a cake stand if you want to be a little bit fancier. I'm taking some of our cream cheese frosting from earlier, and I'm going to just put a little bit of it right on the bottom of the plate. And now we put our cakes back on. I'm also using a cake turnstile. It makes it a little bit easier for decorating. Again, if you don't have one, it's okay. You can just turn a plate, or you can turn your cake stand as you go. We're going to set the top layer off to the side here, and we'll be adding in our filling to that first layer. Now here's where some people, if they think they're going to have a dry cake or they want to add extra moisture, here's where you can add a little bit of a sugar water mixture. It's 1 part sugar and 1 part water that you boil down, and it's called simple syrup. You just boil it until it all melts, set it aside, and let it cool. Then you can sprinkle that around your cake. That'll just add an extra layer of moisture. I don't necessarily worry about that. That's why I wrap my cakes beforehand and put them in the freezer right away. That helps trap the moisture in. But if I'm ever making just a plain vanilla cake or I'm worried about dryness, I'll add a little bit of simple syrup, and you can even flavor it depending on what you're making. For now, we're going to be using our cream cheese frosting from earlier to add in a filling in the center. So you're going to start right from the outside, and then just as even as you can, go right around. You don't want to go all the way over the edge because this is a very loose frosting. You don't want it to end up leaking out of the cake. That will be sealed after with the buttercream frosting. And you're just creating a spiral right to the center. This is that part where I said if you end up needing a little bit extra on one side versus the other, it can help even out your cake if you're still a little bit lopsided. Now I just spread it inward. Notice again, I'm pulling the frosting in towards the center so that way I don't have to worry about it going out the sides of the cake. Okay, and then give it a nice little even spin around. Perfect. And now you flip over the cake, so the side that you cut is going to be on the bottom. Place it as evenly as you can. That looks fairly even. And what that does, it gives you a nice flat surface to work with on top with sharper corners. You always want to have paper towels on hand when you're dealing with cake. It tends to get a little crumbly and messy. We're done with this step for a moment. We're going to slide this off to the side and make our first colored buttercream frosting. So that's it with our cream cheese frosting. Woo! That is all we're doing with our cream cheese frosting. So whatever is left in your piping bag is now yours to enjoy on any treat that you wish. We're going to pull in our buttercream frosting. And this is going to be our color that we're putting on the exterior of the cake. You want to do that first before you start mixing all of your other colors because you want to make sure you have enough. I'm not as worried about the different flowers for having enough frosting because you can always play with that later and make different flowers depending on how much frosting you have left to create them with. Right, so in here I have just over 2 cups, I'd say. And for my cake, I'm going to be dyeing it purple. That is one of my mother's favorite colors, so it's appropriate to do that on a Mother's Day cake. You want to use gel food coloring when you're working with frosting. If you use a water-based, or a liquid one I should say, a more liquid food coloring, it will end up thinning out your frosting more than you would like. You can get gel frosting again from any craft store. They'll typically carry some lines, or you can find it in now places like Stop and Shop or Big Y. They do have a more expanded baking aisle. Okay, we're just going to use a small spoon and just mix it up. You're using a folding method to really make sure that it gets in there. Scoop right around the sides and stir it in. Now it's up to you if you want to leave it kind of half stirred and create a little bit of a marbled effect on your cake, or if you are more of a perfectionist and like one even color, then keep stirring until you have the frosting all the same color. Perfect. Okay. That is all the coloring we are going to do for now because we want to make sure that we have enough frosting set aside to ice the outside of our cake. Now, here's my favorite piping tool. So in here, I'm using a very So it has nice sharp edges on one side and then a flat edge on the other, and it's a very large piping tip. We're putting that in a large bag, large piping bag. Get it all the way to the end, and then we'll be loading it up with our frosting. Using a spatula, just put your frosting right in and scrape it off the side. Here's where that cup or that jar would come in handy, as this frosting is a little bit thicker. Perfect. Okay, squeeze that down. Set this aside, and we're going to begin icing our cake. If you do not have this piping tip, it's okay. You don't necessarily have to use it. I use it because it prevents you from having to do what's called a crumb coat. A crumb coat is when you put a very thin layer of icing on the cake first, and then set it in the fridge to let it harden. That captures any of the extra crumbs floating around. But when you use this specific frosting tip, it creates that layer for you without having to take the extra time to go in the fridge. So we're going to make sure that our cake is kind of in the center here. And we're going to start on the top first. And just, you want the flat side on top and the sharp side on the bottom. And you're going to lightly squeeze as you're turning the cake. Great. So that's your first barrier. Now we're going to start going on the sides. You start from the lowest angle first, squeeze, and then turn, rotate your cake in the opposite direction. Perfect. And then always push down and twist. So we have a little bit left here, so we're going to put it at a slight angle to fill that spot, and do the same idea. Squeeze lightly and twist. If you have any gaps or air bubbles happen, don't worry about it. We will be taking care of that in just a moment. And then with your last little bit of frosting, you are going to push right on top. There we go. See, that was about just over 2 cups, and it's perfect. You'll end up with some extra frosting during this time as we start smoothing out the different layers. One important piece of equipment to have is a bowl of warm water. You want to make sure you have warm water on you during this to help smooth out the frosting and make it not stick to your offset spatula. This is our offset spatula, and it's a key tool when it comes to smoothing and frosting cakes. The other tool that I have here is a cake scraper. This will help you give different designs in your cakes if you desire, and make sure that you're creating an even side as you're going through. So I'm going to put this in my hot water and let it sit there. And same with my offset spatula. You want to let it warm up just for a couple minutes to ensure that the heat goes through the metal. I have some frosting that I had prepared earlier that we'll end up putting some of the extra in. Okay, starting with your offset spatula, you're just going to come around the top, lightly press, and smooth. You can go both ways, and just spin that around. This is where you're working to get any little air pockets out. And you can see how it creates a little bit of a marbled effect on the cake. Perfect. You don't have to worry too much about being perfect on the top, as a lot of that will be hidden by the flowers that we're adding. Okay, next I'm going to be using my cake scraper. You can use your offset spatula at this point as well. I'll show you how if you don't have a cake scraper. Light pressure on the side and just spin round and round. Once you go through once, you see the excess frosting that we'll have. Offset spatula is going to come into play again. We have some gaps here at the bottom that we want to fill, so you just take a little bit on your spatula and just start filling. Again, I'm not a huge sweet person, so I try to be pretty modest with the amount of frosting that I put on cakes. Now, I'm not dipping into my extra frosting at all at this point. So about 2 cups is a perfect amount, it looks like, to ice this cake. Perfect. And then one more round of the sides should do it. Perfect. Now the thing with this is people get caught up thinking that they have to have it look perfect. It doesn't have to look perfect. That is the part of what makes it your own unique cake, by adding your little touches to it. So one last little push in of the top. Remember, the top will be covered in flowers, so it does not matter what it looks like right now as long as it's even. We are going to set this cake off to the side in the fridge to have it harden up a little bit, and next step is making our flowers. Okay, so now it's time to start making our beautiful flowers. What you'll need for this is called a rose pin or a cake tin, and what you'll be doing is using this to put your flower base on and spinning it as you go. You'll want to have some small bowls for making the different colored frostings. Just to save some time, I've already made a few different colors, and I'll show you how I did those. You also need some parchment paper. We'll be using parchment paper to help keep our flowers secured. Some scissors. And those specific piping tips that are listed in the ingredient list and the supply list. We have different piping tips depending on what type of flour that you're making. If you don't have all of them, it's okay. Just follow along and do what you can, and then when you get new piping tips, you can come back and see how to do the other flowers. And last, our beautiful buttercream. Ensure you also will need to have those colored gels that I talked about before. You want to just have a few different colors that you like. I'll be making a blue frosting right now with you. And I've chosen to do red, orange, yellow, green, black, and white for now. I might also bring back in that purple and add a little bit of purple on top of the cake as a filler as well. So let's do our first colors. It's the same method as when you made the purple frosting. You're going to be putting in a little bit of your buttercream. For the flowers, you're really judging by how much frosting. You used about 2 cups for that. So we've got about, I'd say, a good 4 cups left, just maybe 5 cups. You really want to start off with about a ½ cup for each color that you're using. We're not making a ton of flowers, so you don't need that much frosting for each flower. A flower like a rose might use a little bit more frosting than a flower like a sunflower. This is for our hydrangeas. Our hydrangeas are going to be one of the big decorative pieces and space fillers on top of the cake. I've already added some blue. I'm going to add a tiny bit more blue. Perfect. You don't want to go crazy with this. Don't add too much. A little goes a long way. And we're going to be stirring it up again. Now with hydrangeas, I want to keep the frosting a little bit marbled looking. It's going to give the flowers some depth. This is also true when you're talking about making roses, and also if you're making a flower like a dahlia. You want it to have a little bit of different colors in it. Beautiful. So now, I'm using a smaller piping bag. I get these great disposable plastic bags that you can also reuse depending on what time. Frosting will last about 2 weeks in the fridge and up to a month fully sealed to put away. If you put it in the freezer sealed, it will also last till about 6 months sealed in the freezer. You just want to let it come to room temperature first before using it and whip it up again. For the hydrangeas, I have the piping tip number 30 on top. It's a little star tip, and I use what's called a coupler. A coupler is a plastic piece that you're putting 1/2 of it inside the bag, cutting off the tip of your bag, adding the piping tip that you'd like, and it has a nice little plastic seal. The neat part about using couplers is now, say that I want to use blue for a different flower that requires a different piping tip. I can simply unscrew it, take that piping tip off, and then use it for what I want. So we're going to fill this up with blue, and then we can start making our flowers. You want to be careful not to overfill these bags. As I mentioned previously, the heat from your pans is going to cause the icing to melt a little bit. So it's not a bad idea just to put enough for what you're using and save some aside in a bowl in case you need to replenish it after. All right, squeeze it till it's just right about to come out and set it aside. Right, now comes the hard but fun part. We're going to start making our actual flowers. I'm going to start with a rose. A rose is one that I've always found to be a tricky flower, but you can master it. Always have a damp paper towel on hand as this can get a little messy. For my roses, I decided to use a nice red. You can use whatever color you would like. Whatever your favorite color is, I just went classic. Make sure the tip is clean. And we're going to be taking our little nail here, putting a tiny bit directly on the nail, tiny bit of frosting right on the nail, and then placing a piece of parchment paper on there. So I got my little scraps of parchment paper, pretty self-explanatory, by taking a large piece of parchment paper and cutting it up into squares. You always just have some extra parchment on hand if you need to make more. What this does is a lot of times when you watch these flower videos, you see people using scissors to cut them and place them on cakes. I could never get the hang of that. So I started using parchment as a base, and then I set it off to the side. I can easily take it off of the nail and set it down, and then I can put it in the fridge to let the flour harden before I attempt to put it on my cake. One big thing with cooking and baking I've always found is you need to find what works best for you. Now here we're using a number 104, which is a rose petal tip. You can see it has a pointed end and then a rounded edge. We're going to be using with the pointed end facing upwards and the rounded edge at the bottom. Hold your nail in your forefinger and thumb so you can spin it around easily. And you're going to start by making the base. You're making a little teepee to start your rose. It looks like a little bud. And then, as you're spinning the nail, so you're giving light pressure and spinning the nail at the same time, now we're going to spin the nail in the reverse direction. This is where it gets a little tricky. You're going to be doing this arching motion while slightly leaning this out and spinning the nail. So you're spinning it, I find it works best if I spin it towards myself. Some people do spin it away. Practice both methods and see what works for you. So I'm going to make a little bit of a rainbow and spin it towards me, and then pull it down. Again, and pull it down. Reset. Okay. And I'm putting just enough pressure to have the icing come out. You can see I'm arching a little bit, spinning at the same time, and then pulling it back down. Don't worry if you make any little mistakes, they can always be hidden by making leaves after. And that is about as big as I'd like to go. Now I pull off the parchment paper and I set it down on a board. Going to do one more rose. Make sure your bag is nice and tight. Twist it. So first, again, we're going to make our little rose teepee to start. And now we are going in the reverse direction. Arch and pull down. No two roses are going to look the same as you make them. And that's okay. In nature, they don't look the same. Perfect. Now if you'd like to make any just little rose buds, you can do that as well. You'll make small rose buds by keeping the pointed edge towards you, the wide towards the top, and you're doing a little U shape here. And then coming back on yourself. Doesn't look like much now. When you add leaves, it's a little rosebud. Do that again. Pull it back on itself. Perfect. And that's a rose. I made 5 different roses for this cake. If it's not your favorite flower, you don't have to make a ton. It's a lot of fun to practice. Next, we're going to be making a couple daisies. Another piece of parchment on there, nice and firm. Now a daisy also uses a rose piping tip. And this time, you're going to be just leaning it a little bit different. So you're going to be hamming it so the pointed tip faces away from you and the rounded tip is towards you. You're going to be squeezing lightly and pulling out again, kind of like the rosebuds, but you're going to be creating again a little bit of a U on itself. Starting at the center point, light pressure, pull it out and pull it back in. You want to get it tight enough so you don't see any gaps in between. Go. If you end up with any gaps, you can always fix it when you come back around. And now in the center of this, we're going to be adding a little bit of black right in the center and some yellow around it. For that, I'm going to place my daisy down on the board to finish it. We're going to do a few specks of black right in the very middle. You'll notice we use black a few times during this. Okay. And then we have yellow. So currently I have the tip on there for sunflowers. I'm going to switch it out real quick. I'm going to be using a thin tip number 3, thin piping tip, and adding a little bit of yellow right around that black center. So now, you have a beautiful daisy with a little yellow, black, and the petals all around. You can make however many you'd like to put on top of your cake. Again, this preference is up to you. Let's switch this back and we can do our sunflower next. I personally love sunflowers. I think they are gorgeous. I can't wait till summer whenever they come out. They're one of my favorite flowers. Put that little bit of seal right in there. And the sunflower tip we're using, it's a leaf tip. So it's number 352, and it's made to create leaves, but it's the perfect shape to also do sunflowers. So you'll see it has a little bit of the V in it. You're going to be holding it so the points are going up and down. Now using your nail as kind of a guide, you're going to draw a little bit of a circle right around the edge of your nail. And this will be your guide to start your sunflower. Now using that circle, you're going to put a slight pressure and then release and pull out. This should create a little bit of a leaf effect. So slight pressure and pull out. By putting that first circle, you're also giving your flower some dimension. So once we do the first ring, you're going to go back in and offset it and do a second ring. Okay, and a third. now you're going to put the center in. Make sure this is nice and tight. Perfect. And you have a cute little sunflower to use. I'll make a couple more of those as we go to add on to the cakes. I absolutely love to have sunflowers on there. Let's do one more together. Do the little circle ring around. And a little bit of pressure and pull back. Do the second ring right inside. One more ring. And get a nice closed sunflower. And add in the center. That goes down, I'm going to finish it. Perfect. So that will be beautiful on the cake. Our next flower is going to be a dahlia. All right, we're ready to make the dahlia. Little in the center. Put on your piece of piping tip. And the same with the sunflower, we need to give the dahlia a little bit of height. So you're going to be making a circle just inside where your nail is. The tip we're using is a number 8 Wilton. It's a specially designed petal tip specifically used for flowers like dahlias. So now that we created our little mound right in the middle, this is your base for the flower. We're going to begin similar to the sunflower. This has a little U shape in it, and you want the U the correct way, facing up and in towards the cake. With a little bit of a tilt, you're putting some pressure, and then you're pulling up and letting go. It's not as direct of a pull as the sunflower. It's just a light pressure guiding it up and then releasing. They don't all have to be perfectly the same. You can fix them after. I chose a nice orange color. I really like to use pretty spring colors. I'm willing it to be spring. It's been a little dreary lately, and I'm really hoping the weather will change. So now you're starting similar with the sunflower, a second row, piping right up. And then we're doing a third row. If you make any too short, you can go back and fix them. It's the beauty of working with buttercream. You can fix things. That one I made a little too long, so I'm going to pinch it. Perfect. Coming in. Add a couple more right at the center. Lengthen some if you feel like they need it. And the theme keeps going. I put a tiny bit of black right in the middle, just to give it some depth. And that is a dahlia. As you saw right here, I am almost full with all of my flowers. Let's see if I can make a little more room here. The last flower we're going to practice with is an iris. So with the iris, I actually want to use some of my purple again. So I know we have purple all over the cake, but what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to mix a little bit of the purple and the blue. So I'm going to put some of the purple in off to the side and just kind of spread it so it's flat in the bag. And then I'm going to take some of my hydrangea blue. Ooh, likes to stick. There we go. And we're going to put that in the bag as well. Okay, we're going to kind of work the blue down. We want just a couple different colors. I'm going to put a little bit more blue in there. Perfect. Okay, that looks good. Now with the iris, we're using a different type of rose petal tip. This one is a Wilton 97L. It has a nice little squiggle to it. It gives an extra little piece to the petal to give it a little bit more of a ribbon effect. So we put that on here. Okay. Now, with the thin tip facing away from you, you're going to be very lightly pulling similar to how you did the daisy, except you're going to be moving it slightly to create a ribbon effect. So as you're pulling away, you're moving it slightly, and you're creating this nice looking ribbon effect. You'll notice I have a big hole in the middle, so I can add another layer very lightly, again, to create that effect. Now in iris, you're going to flip it around and do the same, except thinner on the bottom. You only want one layer on the bottom. And then little arms right off to each side. And that is our iris. If we want to add a little bit more detail, back to the black. You can pull black right down the center on the bottom and right on the top. And that is a beautiful iris to add to your cake. You can see how the two different colors give it some extra dimension. We'll do another one of those. I know I'm giving this, I know it's for Mother's Day, but I also have a friend whose birthday is very close to this, so she will most likely be getting this beautiful cake in celebration of her birthday. So again, you start at the center lightly and then pull it out while shaking it just a little bit to give it a nice ribbon effect. We'll do one more. Spin it around, do the same except thinner on the bottom. Little arms to the side. And add in some extra detail. Do a couple more irises, as I know those are one of my favorite flowers. And I just like doing them. They're a pretty easy pipe once you get the hang of the motion. And again with flowers, if something goes a little bit wrong, it's okay. It's a flower. Each one is supposed to look unique. Let's do one more. Perfect. Little arms. Great. All right. Now, as I'm decorating my cake, I might decide, okay, well, I might want a couple more daisies, but you don't have to go overboard too quick. It's better to have a couple less than what you think you're going to need initially. So I'm going to put these again in the fridge for a few minutes. I want them to harden slightly before I attempt to put them on the cake. Our flowers are in the fridge, hardening up, so it's easier to put them on the cake. Now I'm going to transfer my iced cake to my cake stand. Taking my offset spatula, I'm going to carefully release the cake from the original stand. It's going to get a little messy, but that's okay, I can fix it. Now I need to take my spatula and get underneath that board, just enough to lift it up. There we go. And putting it flat on cake stand. I can make the back, this the back. Whoop, there we go. After we've moved it to the cake stand, we can fix up any little patches with some extra frosting in our opposite spatula. A little bit there, a little bit there. Okay. And then using that warm water and the cake scraper, you can just do the edges one more time, just to seal it up a little bit more. Anything that gets on the actual cake stand, you'll be able to wipe it off easily with a damp cloth. Perfect. So that looks beautiful. Now clean everything else up with a cloth after I've left it in the fridge for a short period of time. Right, now here's the tricky part. Now you need to decide what side of the cake that you want to have as the front side. It's really tricky sometimes. So what you want to do to figure that out is just spin the cake around and take a look at the sides and see which one is the most even. You always hide, if you have any sides that have a couple extra blemishes, you always hide that in the back. I think I'm going to choose this as my front. So keep the front facing towards you. As you go through and decorate, it's really important that you always know what the front of the cake looks like. Right, I think we're ready to start finalizing our decorations on the cake. So before you take your flowers out, the first step is we're going to be adding some hydrangeas, just to show a little bit of height in there and to add a little bit extra element to the cake. The hydrangeas, we're using a number 30, it's just a star tip specifically for flowers. So you start by putting some pressure on the cake and then just pull up. You notice that it gives it a little bit more of a depth when you have the two different colors in there, the kind of marbled look of the white and the blue. Now put those all together, keep pushing down and pulling up in kind of a round fashion. And this is your hydrangea. It's as simple as that. You can make it into a little bit of a ball by putting them on top of one another. Okay. We can turn our cake and add another one. This will just give us a guideline, just something to start with. I like putting a lot of decorations on the side of the cake as well. It adds another element to design and makes it look more unique. We go through, we're going to build that up a tiny bit more. Perfect. Beautiful. And we'll pause there. We're going to take out of our other flowers and we're going to start to figure out where those are going on the cake as well. We also want to make sure we have a green available. Green is going to be one of your primary additives as well to create petals on all of your leaves. So to create a petal, you simply push down like you're doing the sunflower. You want the vertical up and down, and you push and pull out. And this creates a petal effect on your cake. A lot of times I like to add petals right at the very end because they're just an additional filler and it brings that extra depth to your cake as well. Make sure you're putting them right off to the side. You can color any oopsies that you have from before. Perfect. I think we're ready to put our flowers on. I'm excited. Okay, flowers are out of the fridge and they're ready to be put on the cake. So for this I'm going to use just a little scraper helper. And let's do our roses first. So let's add in, you can just peel it off a little. If it's hardened enough, you should be able to just take it off of the paper and place it where you want. If you want to give it some height or some depth, you can take any of your colors and just put a little bit of a blob right underneath it. That way you can give your flowers some height on the cake. Let's do another rose right over here. You want to work quick with this because these will start melting fairly fast. Another one right over here. Beautiful. Right on the side, do a little bunch. Okay, and I'm going to save my last one to see if I like it, where it goes. Now I'm going to add in my sunflowers. Let's just add in some little spots underneath. For the sunflower, I am going to match the color underneath. It's yellow, and I'll fill it in with any leaves around to hide that. Let's add another sunflower right on the side here. Okay. And let's do our third one right over here. There really is no science to this. It's just going through and deciding where you think it will look nice. You're going to see that we're going to fill in a lot of space with different greens and blues after this. Next up is our daisy. I think our daisy is going to look nice right there, so let's get some white. Put a nice spot there for the daisy. Gently peel it off. You have to be careful with your more delicate flowers to ensure, oh, like I just did, you don't break them. The beautiful part about frosting is I can take that, put a tiny bit of fresh frosting on it and squeeze it right back on there, and then I'll hide it with a leaf. Add one more daisy right over here. We need a flower. Beautiful. You want your flowers to start kind of overlapping and going together. Next, we're going to do our dahlia. Let's take a larger one. I think we need to fill in the rose right there. That looks like the perfect spot for another rose. Yes, absolutely perfect right there. Okay, now let's add in a couple dahlias. I'm going to put one right there. We need a pop of color. Again, be very gentle with these fragile, fragile flowers. Perfect. Add another pop of color right over here. You can see I'm adding a little swirl to put the dahlia on top of. Okay, and I think I'm going to sneak the last one right over here with this one. And some of your flowers might need to go back in the fridge for a couple minutes till they're fully hardened. Let's test out, yep, these irises and that last dahlia I made still need a couple more minutes before we can put them on the cake. So right now we can add in our little rosebuds. Add in one on the edge. Another on the edge over here. And some color on this edge. Great, we're gonna put these last flours in the fridge for a few more minutes, and then we'll come back to the cake. All right, while those are finishing hardening, we can continue making different flours on our cake and adding some other great colors. I'm going to switch out the tip of the multicolored purple and blue to another star tip to create an illusion of smaller hydrangeas. Now you're looking for any kind of gaps or blank spaces you have on your cake. I know I have a couple more flowers to add, but they can be added after this step. So using that star tip again, you're just pushing down on the cake and adding some more dimension. Add some of that in here. We have a nice big gap. And here's where you start to get to the end of some of your frostings, which that is perfectly okay too. It just means you'll end up using a different color. Add some more blue. If your frosting tip ever gets stuck, you can take a little toothpick and go in and pull out whatever might be making it stick. Sometimes that can happen if you didn't get all the clumps out of your powdered sugar beforehand, or it can simply be just some butter got left behind, but it's very easy to fix. So we're going to continue to make hydrangeas, adding in some very nice elements. So here, I'm going to start going down the side of the cake. Again, to just give it another element and layer. Using hydrangeas as a filler is always a good idea on cakes. And then we'll start to add leaves in just a moment. Perfect. I'm going to save that spot for a dahlia. And let's start on our next color. Now we're going to add some leaves in, all over the cake. You're using that same push and pull technique. Add some greenery and dimension into this cake. You want to be pretty liberal with the amount that you put on the bottom because we've placed our flowers so high up. You want to make sure you're filling in the gaps. And as you're going around with the flowers, make sure that you're spinning around the direction this is facing, so your petals are coming out all different directions and angles to follow your flowers on the cake. Notice that I'm also spinning the cake along with me while I turn and twist and figure out the best spot to put these petals. Beautiful. I think we are almost there. We'll add in a couple more after we put our last flowers on as well. add some dimension. So now we have a nice mossy light colored green. With this, again, we're going to be using it as space filler, just to complete the final look. But before we do that, let's add the rest of our flowers. Okay? Here is our last dahlia. Beautiful. Right there. And now we add our irises in. Now with the irises, again, they're really fragile, so you need to be careful. And if you break off a piece like an arm, you can reattach it as you put it on the cake. So now I will lightly and delicately just place that arm where it should go. I'm trying to pick little areas where I have extra space that the iris can kind of lay down. Perfect. Let's see here. Put one more right over here. Now I'm going to put a couple together. Yes, right on this side. Make it look more like a bouquet. That way it doesn't look so rigid. And the last one, going right over here. You know what? I like the 3. I don't think I'm going to add any more, and that's okay. You can say I've got enough flowers, I don't need to add any more. So now we're going to finish it with this nice light green moss color. As you can see, I started putting it along the back side and the front. Really, you're using this just kind of as a border and to fill in any last little areas that might not have any piece to it. Okay, always keep a paper towel handy, as sometimes they get a little clogged up. Nice filler around. Let's look on this side. We need a little bit more right on the edge here. Thankfully, we have a lot of greenery already over here. And add in, get every little last bit of frosting you can. If you're down to the very last bits, you can twist the bag and push it in and use your thumb to guide the very last bit of frosting out. I think that is a great amount. Take another look, see if there's any place you'd like to add a last minute pop of color. We can go over our buds one more time. Use that red, same motion you did before for a little rosebud. Add another little pop of red there. Notice I just keep spinning and looking at all the different angles, but I think we can call it there. So now you've built a beautiful Mother's Day flower bouquet.